Fort Lewis, Washington, August 15, 1944, 14:32 hours. The scent of fresh-baked bread drifted through the canteen. Feldwebel Günter Greve stood frozen before the glass-fronted cooler, 2 American quarters resting in his palm. Payment for a week harvesting Yakima Valley apples. Behind him, 27 German prisoners waited, their uniforms marked with PW in white paint. The teenage clerk watched impatiently, a blue star in the window behind her testifying to a brother serving somewhere in France. "Decide already, Fritz," called a voice from the line. Ice cream or Coca-Cola? An impossible choice. Graue hadn't tasted ice cream since 1939. He'd never tasted Coca-Cola. The American drink had disappeared from German shops when he was still in school. His mother's last letter mentioned sawdust mixed into bread flour to make it stretch. The transport that brought him to Fort Lewis had carried 500 Germans. He remembered their collective shock at the first American meal. Not punishment rations, but the same food eaten by the guards. That morning in the mess hall, he'd left half his breakfast uneaten: eggs, toast, bacon, orange juice. More protein than a Wehrmacht soldier received in 3 days on the front. Outside, B-17 Flying Fortresses thundered overhead, each carrying 6,000 pounds of explosives, more firepower than Groe's entire artillery unit had possessed in Tunisia. America built them at a rate of 1 every hour. The contrast was so absurd that Graue began to laugh, a broken sound that made the clerk reach for the alarm button beneath the counter. "Both," he finally managed in accented English. "I take both, please." As he walked away with ice cream in one hand and Coca-Cola in the other, something fundamental shifted in his understanding of the war. The metal fence contained his body, but the true prison was the slow dawning realization that everything he'd been told about American weakness had been a lie. The Americans were defeating them with calories, 1 meal at a time. Liberty Ship SS John W. Brown, February 17, 1943, North Atlantic. The ship rolled violently, steel plates groaning as water broke over the bow. Below decks, Obergefreiter Johannes Kellner braced himself against the bulkhead. Around him, 500 German prisoners captured at Kasserine Pass huddled on narrow bunks stacked 3 high. Kellner clutched a wrinkled propaganda pamphlet depicting American guards beating emaciated prisoners. "This awaits you in American hands," read the caption. The men whispered about torture and starvation, voices barely audible above the thrashing ocean. "How long until America?" asked Gefreiter Muller, a hollow-cheeked tank gunner who'd lost 20 pounds during the North African campaign. 3 days, perhaps 4, Kellner replied. "They're taking us to Norfolk, Virginia." 3 American guards stood at the compartment entrance, Thompson submachine guns held casually. On the 3rd day, an impossible thing happened. Hot food appeared. Not thin gruel, but actual beef stew with vegetables. The Americans called it chipped beef and complained about its quality. The Germans fell silent, eating every morsel. "Is this normal?" Kellner whispered to a guard. The American shrugged. "Standard Army rations. 3 squares a day, same as us. Geneva Convention." By 1944, U.S. Maritime Commission records would show 30,000 German POWs arriving monthly in America aboard returning Liberty ships. The scale was staggering. 425,000 Germans processed into 700 camps across 46 states, transported in Pullman cars that German civilians hadn't seen since before the war. That night, Kellner began the journal he would keep throughout his captivity. Its first entry read, "Propaganda lie. Americans serve meat 3 times daily. Weight check shows I've lost 12 pounds from combat rations. Doctor says I'll gain it back quickly. I don't understand this America." The ship's manifest listed its cargo as 40,000 tons war material, eastbound, 500 enemy personnel, westbound. The true cargo, unrecorded in any ledger, was doubt, seated in the minds of men who'd been promised American barbarism and received American abundance instead. Hamburg, Germany, December 12, 1943, 19:15 hours. Frost patterns formed on the window glass. Frau Margaret Bergmann pulled the blackout curtains tight, then lit a small paraffin lamp. Her weekly ration carefully measured. Air raid sirens had fallen silent for now. The RAF bombing campaign had turned half of Hamburg into what survivors grimly called Die Mondlandschaft, the lunar landscape. She unfolded her ration cards on the kitchen table. 550 grams of meat monthly, 300 grams of black bread daily, minimal margarine. The children's faces had grown gaunter each week. The Reich promised victory would bring abundance, but 5 years of war had delivered only hunger. "Mama, is there mail?" asked Dieter, her 10-year-old. His collarbones stood prominently beneath pale skin. She retrieved a letter bearing American censor marks and the postmark of Mississippi. Wilhelm's handwriting, recognizable despite months since his capture at El Alamein. "My dear ones," she read, "this morning we had orange juice with breakfast. Real oranges, not substitute. The coffee contains actual sugar. I have learned to eat something called peanut butter. The food here is plentiful, though we work hard cutting timber 6 days weekly." She folded the letter carefully. The descriptions of food felt like deliberate cruelty. 3 days later, a Red Cross package arrived containing real coffee, worth 3 months' wages on Hamburg's black market. A note inside read simply, "From my wages. More will follow." By 1944, German civilian rations had fallen to 1,000 to 1,250 calories daily. Meat allocation dropped from 1,900 grams to 550 grams monthly. Meanwhile, her husband, an enemy of the American state, somehow earned wages sufficient to purchase luxury goods. The neighborhood women gathered that evening, sharing meager resources. Margaret distributed the coffee beans one by one, each woman receiving exactly 3. "Have you heard from Hans?" Margaret asked Helga Müller, whose son had been captured in Italy. "Yes, a letter from Texas," Helga replied. "He writes that they feed them meat every day and eggs for breakfast." "My cousin works in POW administration," whispered Frau Schultz. "The Americans follow Geneva Convention requirements precisely. Our men receive the same rations as American soldiers." A silence fell over the room. None needed to say aloud the subversive thought. Their men might eat better in American captivity than on the Eastern Front. They might be safer behind American wire than wearing German uniforms. Camp Carson, Colorado, March 20th, 1944, 11:45 hours. Colonel James Bull Harrison strode through the mess hall, clipboard in hand. A former cattle rancher from West Texas, he ran his POW camp like a livestock operation. Maximum efficiency, minimum waste, profitable output. His latest innovation stood before him, the Sunday steak program. German prisoners who exceeded weekly work quotas received a Texas-sized ribeye each Sunday, a 16-ounce cut unthinkable in meat-rationed Germany even before the war. Harrison had calculated the cost at approximately 52 cents per steak, requiring a 30% productivity increase to justify the expense. The first qualifying group approached the serving line, their eyes widening as kitchen staff placed the steaks on their trays. Oberfeldwebel Klaus Schmidt, a decorated veteran of Rommel's Afrika Korps, stared at his plate in disbelief. "Is there some mistake?" he asked in careful English. "No mistake," Harrison replied. "You cleared 40% above quota on the lumber detail. This is your reward." Schmidt nodded slowly. "In North Africa, we were told Americans would starve us if captured." Harrison smiled thinly. "We're capitalists, Oberfeldwebel. Starving workers is bad business." Each American POW camp required approximately 1.25 tons of food daily. The transportation network allocated 15,000 rail cars monthly just for POW supplies. The cost ran $125 million annually, but generated $180 million in prisoner labor value, turning enemy soldiers into America's most cost-effective workforce. Within 3 weeks, work productivity increased 40%. Within 2 months, even the most ardent Nazis volunteered for additional shifts. "Sir, we've got a problem with the ice cream machine," reported Lieutenant Davis, the mess officer. "Get maintenance on it right away," Harrison ordered. "Every German who eats American ice cream goes home knowing exactly what he was fighting against, and exactly why he lost." That evening, Harrison composed his report. "In my assessment, we are defeating National Socialism one meal at a time." Camp Trinidad, Colorado, April 16, 1944, 09:15 hours. Major Robert Atkins adjusted his stethoscope as Obergefreiter Kellner stepped onto the medical scale. The camp physician noted the reading with clinical detachment. 172 pounds, a 27-pound increase since arrival. Atkins made no comment, but Kellner caught the raised eyebrow. "Is something wrong, Herr Doctor?" Kellner asked, suddenly self-conscious about his expanding waistline. "Nothing wrong," Atkins replied, marking the chart. "Your body is simply adjusting to proper nutrition after prolonged combat rationing." Across America, Army doctors documented the same phenomenon in 700 POW camps. Average weight gain among German prisoners reached 24 pounds by 1945. Meanwhile, intelligence reports from Germany indicated civilians were losing an average of 18 pounds, creating a 42-pound differential between prisoners and the homeland they'd supposedly fought for. The Provost Marshal General's office began tracking this metric as a psychological indicator. A classified directive ordered camp commanders to document weight changes, considering them evidence of ideological transformation. Photographs of prisoners before capture and after 6 months in captivity became a classified data set, too revealing to share publicly. "Have you been participating in the camp's athletic program?" Atkins asked, measuring Kellner's blood pressure. "Baseball," Kellner admitted reluctantly. "I play first base." The Trinidad camp fielded 12 baseball teams in an organized league, complete with uniforms and equipment provided by the American Red Cross. Former Wehrmacht soldiers now argued passionately about batting averages and fielding percentages instead of Aryan superiority. Back in his barracks, Kellner examined his face in a small mirror. His cheeks had filled out. His uniform strained at the waist. The physical transformation mirrored something deeper happening inside him, questions that grew with each American meal. That night he wrote in his journal, "Day 180, camp baseball team needs new first baseman. I volunteered. What is happening to me?" The scales didn't lie. Neither did the hungry letters from home, describing sawdust bread and turnip coffee. With each passing day, with each pound gained, the Reich's promises grew more hollow, America's abundance more undeniable. Camp Ruston, Louisiana, June 12, 1944, 10:30 hours. First Lieutenant Eleanor Matthews supervised the mail censorship team, her desk piled with letters awaiting review. Her unit processed 5,000 letters weekly from German POWs to their families. Regulations permitted basic family communication, but prohibited military information. What the rules didn't address was the psychological impact of food descriptions. "Another one about the ice cream," remarked Sergeant Wilson, passing her a letter. "Third today." Matthews scanned the German text. A Luftwaffe pilot described Sunday's dessert in meticulous detail, real vanilla ice cream with chocolate sauce. He mentioned gaining 15 pounds since capture and asked if his family was receiving adequate rations. Intelligence analysts had created a frequency chart of the most mentioned items. Ice cream, 1,247 mentions. Coffee, 1,122. Meat, 983. Oranges, 745. Chocolate, 612. Words that had become mythological in starving Germany. "Approved or redacted?" Wilson asked. Matthews hesitated. Army intelligence had documented that 89% of POW letters mentioned American food abundance. The War Department debated whether allowing such details constituted psychological warfare against German civilian morale. No formal policy had been established. "Approved," she decided. "Let it through." In Berlin, Joseph Goebbels received a concerning report from the state secret police. German civilian morale was deteriorating as POW letters described American abundance. His propaganda ministry issued an urgent directive to discount these reports as forced American propaganda. The order came too late. The letters had been arriving for months. Matthews held one final letter, considering whether to censor it. A Wehrmacht corporal had written, "The Americans waste more food in a day than we saw in a month on the Russian front. I no longer understand what we are fighting for." After a moment's hesitation, she stamped it approved. Sometimes truth was the most powerful weapon. Each letter carried more than family news. It carried doubt about every Nazi promise of German superiority. She imagined thousands of such letters arriving in bombed-out German cities, each describing a reality that contradicted everything the Reich had claimed about America. No bombing campaign could penetrate German minds more effectively than these simple descriptions of everyday abundance. Camp Papago Park, Arizona, September 14, 1944, 2000 hours. SS Untersturmführer Karl Schmidt tried to maintain discipline in Barracks 17. As the senior Nazi Party member, his job was to enforce ideological conformity among the prisoners. But his authority diminished daily as American abundance undermined the Reich's fundamental premise of German superiority. Schmidt called a meeting to prevent prisoners from attending the camp's voluntary democratic education classes. Only 12 men appeared. 300 others were attending a lecture on American constitutional government in the recreation hall. Even his most loyal followers had begun questioning Nazi racial doctrine after discovering that black mess sergeants supervised their food, better food than they ever ate in Germany. How could inferior races produce such abundance? "You disappoint the Führer," Schmidt declared to the empty barracks. His words echoed hollowly against the wooden walls. By mid-1945, 300,000 German POWs participated in educational programs across American camps. Camp newspapers ran on American-provided printing presses, often publishing critiques of the Nazi regime. Democratic self-governance structures emerged as prisoners elected barracks representatives. The transformation happened fastest in the mess halls. Men who had been taught that Americans were decadent and weak witnessed industrial-scale food production daily. The Reich had promised Germans would eat better than any people on earth. Yet here they sat in captivity, eating better than they ever had in uniform. Schmidt entered the camp canteen, watching as former Hitler Youth members bought ice cream and Coca-Cola, with wages earned building irrigation ditches in the Arizona desert. The prisoners received 80 cents daily, 10 cents per hour for agricultural work. Small amounts by American standards, fortunes compared to what their families earned in Germany. He sat alone that evening, hearing American music and German laughter through the window. Former Wehrmacht soldiers played baseball with American guards in the twilight. The Third Reich was collapsing, not just in Europe, but in the minds of its most devoted soldiers. Each meal served in American camps became an argument against everything the Nazi state represented, delivered 3 times daily with mathematical precision. Near Aachen, Germany, November 7, 1944, 23:45 hours. Oberleutnant Werner Hoffmann huddles with his platoon in a forest clearing. American artillery pounds their position with metronome regularity, 1 shell every 70 seconds. They have 3 days of rations remaining: ersatz coffee, gray bread, synthetic margarine. Intelligence reports that Soviet forces are advancing from the east. Hoffmann unfolds a map on his knee, making calculations not taught at officer school. Which direction offers the best chance of American, rather than Soviet, captivity? Herr Oberleutnant, whispers Feldwebel-Müller, the men are asking what happens if we're captured. Hoffmann studies his second-in-command's face. Is he asking about surrender? Such talk would mean a firing squad if reported to the SS. My cousin was taken at Normandy, Müller continues cautiously. His letters say the Americans feed their prisoners better than the Wehrmacht feeds us. Reports had filtered through Wehrmacht units. Surrender to Americans meant food, shelter, and humane treatment. Surrender to Soviets meant Siberia or execution. The calculus was simple. Western Front resistance began collapsing faster than military situations required. By early 1945, German units openly discussed the golden cage of American captivity. Intelligence intercepts revealed Wehrmacht officers ordering tactical retreats toward American lines. SS units stripped uniforms, pretending to be regular army to access American camps. In the war's final months, German soldiers marched kilometers west to ensure the right captors. The strategic advantage of American abundance became tactical reality in individual surrender decisions. The 101st Airborne holds positions 3 kilometers southwest, Hoffmann says finally. The Russians are 60 kilometers east. Müller nods, understanding perfectly. I'll inform the men, Herr Oberleutnant. Hoffmann makes his decision. We move west at nightfall. There's no shame in surviving this war. That night they walk 5 kilometers through artillery fire to reach American lines, carrying a white flag made from a torn undershirt. Years later, in declassified reports, American intelligence would calculate that 40% of late-war surrenders involved German units deliberately seeking American rather than Soviet capture. The ultimate testament to America's food-based psychological warfare was written not in propaganda, but in the tactical decisions of Wehrmacht officers calculating their best chance of survival. Camp Papago Park, Arizona, December 24, 1944, 1900 hours. Private First Class. Anthony Tony Bassetti stood guard at the mess hall entrance, Thompson submachine gun cradled in his arms. His brother had died at Anzio 9 months earlier. Each German face reminded him of the enemy who killed his brother. The hate had been his companion for months. Inside, something unexpected occurred. German prisoners had organized a Christmas concert with camp commander approval. 300 prisoners and 50 guards gathered as Oberst Wilhelm Braun raised his hands. The prisoners began singing Silent Night, first in German, Stille Nacht, then, haltingly, in English. Bussetti's finger tensed on the trigger guard. These men had killed Americans like his brother, yet something in their voices, the same melody his family sang in Brooklyn, penetrated his anger. "They sound human," whispered Corporal Johnson beside him. The German colonel conducting the choir had tears streaming down his face. Camp staff had learned he lost 3 sons on the Eastern Front. The prisoners received special Christmas rations: turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and apple pie. Many sent portions back to the kitchen, explaining they couldn't eat so much while their families went hungry in Germany. Across America's 700 POW camps, similar scenes played out that Christmas. Nearly 500,000 German prisoners experienced American abundance during the holiday. At Camp Algona, Iowa, prisoners constructed an elaborate nativity scene from scraps of wood. At Camp Clinton, Mississippi, German officers performed Mozart for the American staff. The War Department authorized special holiday rations at a cost of $1.2 million, an expenditure justified as strategic psychological investment. Each Christmas meal served to German prisoners became a profound argument against Nazi ideology. Bussetti felt something shift inside him as the familiar melody filled the room. These weren't monsters. They were conscripts, like his brother was, like he was. As the last notes faded, Bussetti noticed Oberst Braun looking directly at him. Their eyes met in mutual recognition of shared humanity, a small moment of peace in a world at war. Camp Stark, New Hampshire, April 13, 1945, 0730 hours. Colonel Robert Hayes stood stunned before the assembled prisoners. 3,000 German POWs had formed perfect ranks for morning roll call, as they did every day. But their senior representative, Obergefreiter Werner Schmidt, had just made an extraordinary request. "You want to do what?" Hayes asked, certain he'd misheard. "Fast, sir," Schmidt repeated. "We request permission to voluntarily abstain from food tomorrow in respect for your President Roosevelt." News of the president's death had reached Camp Stark via morning radio broadcast. Hayes had expected security challenges, perhaps celebrations among Nazi hardliners. Instead, he faced this incomprehensible gesture from men his nation had been fighting for years. "You understand this is voluntary?" Hayes clarified. "The Geneva Convention requires we provide your meals." "Yes, sir," Schmidt replied. "We will still work our assigned shifts. We ask only that our rations for the day be donated to the local orphanage." By April 1945, internal camp surveys showed complete ideological transformation in 74% of prisoners. The remaining 26% showed significant moderation in previously held Nazi beliefs. The cost-benefit analysis was staggering. While strategic bombing cost $43 billion to reduce German production by only 15%, the $500 million POW program achieved complete ideological reversal in 3/4 of its subjects. Hayes studied the formation, former Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, and even Waffen-SS personnel standing at attention. Men who had once sworn loyalty to Hitler now wished to honor a fallen American president. "Permission granted," Hayes said finally. The next morning, April 14th, 3,000 German prisoners reported for work details without breakfast. American guards watched in amazement as the men who had entered the camp as Nazi soldiers worked diligently without complaint, without food. That evening, Hayes composed his report, "De-radicalization program complete. These men will rebuild Germany in our image. Victory achieved through beef, not bullets." His assessment, classified until 1975, would prove prophetic for post-war Germany. Bremerhaven Port, Germany, December 11, 1945, 1400 hours. Liberty ship Edmund Ross docked at Bremerhaven, delivering the last major contingent of German POWs home. American photographers documented the scene. Skeletal German civilians stood in shocked silence as 2,000 well-fed prisoners marched down the gangplank. The weight differential was so stark that families didn't recognize their own sons and husbands. Hans Kellner searched the crowd, finally spotting his emaciated mother. She touched his face in disbelief. "They said Americans were starving you." "No, Mutti," he responded, pressing a Hershey bar into her hand. "They taught us what we were fighting for was a lie. With food." The statistics told the impossible story. Average German civilian consumption in occupied zones remained at 1,000 to 1,250 calories daily. Former POWs returned with an average 24-pound weight gain. The visual contrast became a powerful symbol of American victory, not just military, but moral and ideological. "Look at them," muttered an American sergeant supervising the disembarkation. "Our prisoners are the healthiest Germans in Europe." By December 1945, more than 370,000 German POWs had been repatriated. Each returned man became living evidence against lingering Nazi propaganda. They carried more than American chocolate and cigarettes. They carried first-hand knowledge of a system that produced abundance rather than scarcity, freedom rather than control. General Lucius Clay, military governor of occupied Germany, wrote in his classified assessment, "We conquered Germany twice, first with armies, then with abundance. The second victory was permanent." As night fell on Bremerhaven, thousands of families escorted their returned sons home, carrying American-supplied rations. The 42-pound average weight differential between returning POWs and German civilians spoke louder than any propaganda broadcast. The evidence was written on their bodies. Democracy produced plenty. Fascism had delivered only hunger. The most effective ambassadors for American democracy weren't diplomats, but former prisoners who had experienced American abundance firsthand. No political argument could counter the simple fact that they'd grown fat in enemy hands. Munich, Germany, May 15, 1952, 10 o'clock hours. Günter Grawe adjusted the Coca-Cola sign in his grocery store window. 7 years after his return from Fort Lewis, he'd built a business importing American goods. His first major contract, Coca-Cola distribution rights for southern Bavaria. The store's specialty section featured peanut butter, breakfast cereals, and chocolate bars, luxuries he first encountered as a prisoner of war. Across post-war Germany, former POWs became the strongest advocates for democratic reconstruction. The Demokratischer Aufbau, democratic construction movement drew leadership disproportionately from American camp veterans. When the Marshall Plan faced Soviet propaganda opposition, these men became its most effective defenders. "We lived in America," they told skeptical countrymen. "We saw what their system produces." The numbers still staggered military historians. 1.275 billion daily calories consumed by German POWs in America. 425,000 German soldiers who returned home as democratic converts. 5,000 documented German POWs who immigrated to America. 74% POWs showing complete ideological transformation. 0 German POWs who starved to death in American camps. A classified appendix to the Strategic Bombing Survey calculated that American POW camps had been 3 times more effective at destroying Nazi ideology than the entire bombing campaign. The math was undeniable. Feeding the enemy had accomplished more than killing them ever could. By 1955, former POWs occupied key positions throughout West German government, business, and education. Their collective experience of American abundance shaped the economic miracle that transformed Germany from rubble to prosperity. The social market economy bore the unmistakable influence of men who had witnessed American capitalism firsthand. Gravey looked up as the shop bell rang. A young American soldier entered, part of the occupation force. "Coca-Cola?" the soldier asked. Gravey smiled and reached into the refrigerator. "Ice cold," he replied in perfect English. "Just like Fort Lewis." The Cold War against communism found its most effective fighters in men who had once fought against America. They had tasted ice cream, and they would never go back.